It was a cold night when Clara, a single mother, was unexpectedly approached by two police officers. What seemed like a simple check turned into a public humiliation, where she was treated as a suspect for no reason at all. But Clara was not. Just any woman. With a heart full of courage and a single call, she turned the tide. What happened next left the police officers, who thought they were above it all, stunned and remorseful. A single decision changed everyone's fate that night, revealing the power of those who refuse to be silenced. If you like this type of story, subscribe now and don't miss the surprising ending of this video. Let's go to the story. Clara worked as a cleaner during the day and still went out of her way to make sure her son had a slightly less difficult life. His heart pounded with every step he took, not out of fear, but out of the responsibility of being everything to Lucas. She knew deep down that she couldn't count on anyone, but that didn't stop her from fighting. She had a protective instinct, stronger than anything the world could throw her way. But that night, Clara found herself in an unexpected situation. She just wanted to go home after an exhausting journey. The biting wind made the darkness seem even deeper, and the silence in the streets seemed suffocating. His mind was constantly alert, thinking about the bills that kept arriving, the difficulties that never ended. However, what she didn't know was that her life would change drastically at that exact moment due to a simple and unusual approach. As she turned the corner of the street, something caught her attention. Two police officers, in cars, parked strategically on the sidewalk watching her. Clara tried to remain calm, but something in their eyes seemed wrong. Before she could take another step, the car drove towards her, and the blue and red lights began to flash. She stopped, her heart racing. He didn't know what could happen now, but something told him it wouldn't be good. "Good evening, ma'am," one of the officers said, with a forced smile that she knew was fake. And without her being able to react, the atmosphere of tension took over the deserted street. The police officer, a man of medium height and impassive expression, got out of the car with a firm and quick step. Clara, who had had uncomfortable experiences with authorities before, instinctively felt the chill run down her spine. She looked at the other officer, a young man with a serious expression, and prepared herself for the worst. The deserted street seemed even emptier now, and the car's headlights reflected in the puddles of water on the ground, creating a surreal scene, as if the world was distorting around her. "Documents, please," said the police officer with a firm voice, interrupting the silence of the night. Clara reached for her bag, already feeling the pressure increase. She knew something was wrong, but she tried to maintain her composure. He took a deep breath before pulling out his wallet, trying to hide his involuntary shaking. However, before he could hand over the documents, the other police officer stepped forward, interrupting the moment with a harsh tone. "Do you know why you're being stopped?" The tone was not one of curiosity, but of accusation. "No, sir, I'm just going home," Clara replied, trying to remain calm, her voice shaky but steady. "Ah, of course," said the policeman with a wry smile, taking a step towards her and examining her as if she were an object. "Go home, but in a classy place, right? Here, walking at this hour. It must be very interesting to live in the shade, right?" His gaze was full of contempt, and the other officer, who until then seemed more neutral, also let out an awkward laugh. The tone of the conversation quickly changed from a simple approach to something more intimidating, something that Clara could not control. They weren't there to investigate, they were there to humiliate. She pursed her lips and took a step back, trying to get away from the situation a little, but the younger officer approached again, blocking her exit. "Do you think you can go around without even explaining? I might need to search you," he said, with a slight threat in his tone. The tension in the air was palpable. Clara felt fear tighten in her chest, but also a growing anger. What had she done wrong, just trying to get home after a long day at work? She didn't understand. Those police officers were taking advantage of her vulnerability, and she knew that night, once again, her life was being decided by the hands of people who didn't see her as someone worthy of respect. But there was something Clara didn't know: their simple presence, their way of acting, the way they were treating an ordinary woman would trigger something much bigger. She just didn't know yet that in a moment of desperation, she would make a decision that would change everything. The seconds that passed seemed like hours to Clara. She felt the weight of the two police officers' gaze on her, the silent judgment and the imminent feeling that something very wrong was about to happen. The older police officer, with the superior smile still on his face, took a step towards her, blocking her view of the street. "I think you're trying to hide something, ma'am," he said with a cynical tone as he began to approach Clara in an intimidating manner. He gestured to his partner, who watched from afar, but with his eyes fixed on her. I'm not hiding anything," Clara replied, trying to keep her voice calm, but the growing sense of danger made her words almost inaudible. She knew what could happen. She knew they were trying to create a situation to justify a search or something more serious. The police officer was watching her from top to bottom, and that was when he made the move she feared. He touched her shoulder abruptly, forcing her to turn away, as if he were preparing her for a physical approach. Clara instinctively shrank back, her body becoming a protective barrier around herself. "Please, I just want to go home. I didn't do anything wrong," he said, his voice now quieter but carrying a quiet urgency. But the police officer wasn't interested in listening. "I don't like people who talk a lot," he replied, with a disdainful tone, and with a quick movement he pushed her a little, making Clara lose her balance. She took a step back, shocked by the violence and the way they treated her. She felt a wave of panic spreading through her body, fear mixed with indignation. The other police officer, the youngest, approached, seeming not to realize the seriousness of the situation, but still part of that hostile environment. He didn't have the same authority as his elder, but he seemed to follow his orders without question. He looked at Clara with a blank expression, as if he didn't care what was happening there. "If you don't cooperate, it will be more difficult for you," the older officer said again, already running his hand over his gloves, as if preparing for what he considered necessary. It was a veiled threat, but Clara knew very well what he meant. She felt her breathing quicken. It wasn't the first time she felt the pressure of an authority on her, but now it was different. The way they were treating her, with disdain and aggression, reached a limit. But Clara, even with the panic in her chest, knew she couldn't give in, not this time. She took a deep breath, and as the officer pushed her so that she turned completely onto her back, something inside her rebelled. She could no longer just be the woman who accepted the abuse. Something inside her lit up, and deep in her heart, she knew she needed to do something now. The humiliation could not continue, and an impulsive but necessary decision took shape in his mind. "I'm not going to let that happen," she muttered to herself, eyes falling on the cell phone in her bag. The air felt thick, charged with tension. Clara, with fear burning in her chest, began to feel a surge of adrenaline. The feeling of helplessness, so familiar in so many moments of his life, seemed to want to swallow his sanity. But something inside her woke up, something she could no longer ignore. She couldn't allow that situation to be another one where she just put her head down and accepted it. Not this time. The police officer, with his authoritarian stance, pushed her once again, forcing her to take a few steps towards the wall of a nearby building, as if he wanted to restrict her movements. But Clara, still tense, didn't back down. She could feel the humiliation burning her skin, but the desire to protect herself and her son, Lucas, was stronger than any fear. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to calm down. She thought about Lucas, her home, his smile waiting for her, the fragility of her life. He needed her, she needed to be strong for him. Clara swallowed her saliva, feeling a mixture of anger and courage rising within her. Suddenly, an idea formed in his mind. It was a risky strategy, but it was his only chance. With a quick gesture, she took her cell phone from her bag. The older police officer, who was busy examining his expression, didn't notice the movement. Clara disguised it, as if she were trying to find something inside the bag. But in an act of pure determination, she punched in the numbers on her phone without looking at the screen. His heart was pounding, his hands were sweating. She knew that this act could be the key to changing the dynamics of that situation. "Do you see anything?" the younger police officer asked suspiciously, noticing that Clara was looking at her cell phone. Clara, without looking at him, simply murmured, "I'm calling someone. I have the right to do that." She wasn't sure who exactly would answer the other side, but she knew she was looking for someone with power, someone who could intervene, someone who could see the injustice in what was happening here. The older police officer approached, trying to see what she was doing, but she, with a quick movement, put the cell phone to her ear and with a controlled voice said, "Yes, it's urgent. I need help now." She was no longer just trying to defend herself. She was starting to take control of the situation. The decision to make this call was a deliberate strategy, a way to turn the tables and try to bring to light the consequences of the abuse. The adrenaline made his senses heightened, and the phone seemed to be his last line of defense. It was a risky move, but Clara felt that if she didn't do it now, she might never have the chance to take control of her own story again. With the sound of her rapid breathing filling the space, she waited, her eyes fixed on the police, already predicting that their reaction would be even more intense. But at that moment, Clara's courage had finally overcome her fear. Silence took over the scene, except for the frantic sound of Clara's breathing, who was forcing herself to remain calm while her finger pressed the cell phone screen. She didn't know exactly who would answer on the other end, but it didn't matter. The simple fact of making that connection was already an act of courage, of resistance. The ringing of the telephone echoed in the cold night, cutting through the tense air. Every second felt like an eternity. She knew she was risking everything. If that call went to the wrong person, or if the police decided to act even more aggressively, the consequences could be unpredictable. However, Clara felt she had no choice. Her son, Lucas, was waiting for her, and she could not allow this abuse to continue. Not this time. Finally, someone answered on the other end. A calm, feminine voice came to Clara, and she almost breathed. A sigh of relief, although the tension was still palpable. "Hello," said the voice. Clara recognized the professional and calm tone, something that made her believe that she was talking to someone who could, in fact, help her. She was the neighborhood social worker, a woman known for her firm stance against abuses of authority and injustice. Clara had already spoken to her on other occasions, but she never thought she would actually need to turn to her in this way. But that night, the situation was beyond anything she had ever faced. "It's Clara. I'm being stopped by 2 police officers. They are treating me in an aggressive and threatening way, and I don't know what to do," Clara said with her voice shaking but determined. "I need help. They're trying to search me for no reason, and I'm scared." The social worker listened in silence for a few seconds, and Clara felt a sense of hope emerge. She knew the voice on the other end was assessing the gravity of the situation. But most importantly, she felt like someone was finally listening to her pain, her silent struggle that had seemed invisible for so long. "Clara, stay calm. I'll send the team. Keep talking to them. Don't hang up. I'm already taking action," the voice said firmly. "They have no right to intimidate you like that." Confidence in the social worker's words began to support Clara. Feeling that there was someone with power on her side made the tension lessen, even if a little. She held her cell phone tightly in her hand, trying not to show the relief that was beginning to invade her body. But the threat was still there, the officers watching her closely, paying attention to her every move. They still didn't know what was going on. The older officer's eyes narrowed as Clara spoke on the phone. He took a step forward, trying to intimidate her. But Clara kept her cell phone to her ear, as if she was completely trusting the woman on the other side. "There's no point, sir," Clara said more firmly now. "I'm talking to the social worker. She will take action. I will no longer accept this type of treatment." The tension rose once again, but there was something different in the air. Clara now had a direct line to the help she desperately needed, and the police, as much as they wanted to intimidate her, knew something was changing. The environment around Clara seemed to have changed in a palpable way. Before, she felt alone, isolated, with only the threatening presence of the two police officers around her. But now, as she heard the social worker's voice on the phone, something inside her began to ignite, like a spark of hope that was finally becoming a flame. On the other side, the social worker was acting quickly. Clara could hear the sound of the woman typing, taking notes, and eventually making calls to the local police department. The fact that someone was taking control of the situation gave her a strength she didn't know she had. It was as if she had just gone from victim to someone with a voice and power. The older police officer, who was clearly irritated by the situation, took a step forward, trying once again to intimidate her. "Do you really think this is going to end well for you?" he asked with an arrogant smile, trying to destabilize her. Clara, her voice firmer now, replied, "I'm not alone anymore. I'm protected." But the real change began when the youngest officer's radio crackled. The sound of communication between the officers seemed like a warning beacon for both of them. The older man quickly looked at the radio, then at Clara, and the expression on his face began to change. Clara could feel that something was about to happen. She already knew that the social worker had moved pieces behind the curtains, but even she could not imagine how quickly the scenario would transform. The first visible consequence was the way the police began to become more tense. The youngest, who initially seemed more neutral, began to look around more frequently, uncomfortably. He knew something was changing, that they were losing control of the situation. The older officer's arrogance also diminished, as he realized that Clara was no longer at their mercy. "Do you really have the courage to do this, ma'am?" the older police officer asked, but his voice no longer had the same threatening tone as before. He began looking at the radio again, as if waiting for orders to direct him another way. That's when the siren of a patrol car in the distance broke the silence of the night, increasing the tension of the scene. Clara hadn't known where the siren was coming from, but she felt the immediate impact. Something big was about to happen, and it wasn't just the two police officers against her anymore. The social worker, with her quick intervention, had alerted the local command, and a supervisory team was already on the way to ensure the situation was resolved correctly. The older officer, once so confident in his control of the situation, took a step back, now visibly more cautious. Clara knew that the consequences of her call were already materializing in the form of a change in the behavior of the police officers. The dynamic was changing, and now they were starting to realize that they were being watched, that they were about to be held accountable. Clara, who until a few minutes ago had been on the verge of hopelessness, now felt that the scales were beginning to tip in her favor. The arrival of the supervision team and the simple intervention of someone who listened was making a difference. As the sound of the siren approached, the officers began to feel the weight of their own actions. The air, which had once been charged with tension and hostility, was now filled with a growing discomfort. The older officer looked at the radio once more, and his once haughty and threatening posture was now wavering. The reality that the situation was about to spiral out of his control became undeniable. The younger officer, who initially seemed indifferent, was now visibly nervous. He began to observe Clara with a more cautious look, as if he was finally beginning to realize the seriousness of what they were doing. They both knew they could no longer ignore the change in dynamics. The imminent presence of a higher authority, perhaps even external oversight, caused them to begin to reconsider the consequences of their actions. The older man, trying to maintain some semblance of authority, took a step back, his voice lower and disconcerted. I don't think we need to go through with this," he said, trying to look away. Clara noticed the regret that was beginning to form in his posture, but she didn't let herself be fooled. Words of apology or relief at having gotten out of a tense situation were not enough to erase what had already happened. He had crossed a line, and although he was now trying to recant, Clara knew that words were not enough. She felt a mix of anger and satisfaction. The humiliation he suffered could not be erased with just a look of regret. The older man, still visibly uncomfortable, tried to return to the car, but before he could take another step, the social worker's voice, now on a call conferred with the police authority, sounded in the background. "They have no right to search you without a valid reason, and everything that happened will be investigated." The words, loaded with security, came to be a final blow for the police. The older officer's gaze fixed on Clara once again. It was a look that mixed anger and shame. He knew the situation was about to take a legal turn. The idea that he could be investigated, that his conduct could be publicly questioned, was beginning to take root in his mind. He seemed to weigh the consequences of his actions and the possible developments of that night. The regret was not immediate, but as the minutes passed, it became clearer. The youngest seemed to realize that the only way to get out of this situation without further damage would be to walk away completely. He looked at his partner, who was still trying to regain some sort of control over the situation, and made a subtle movement, almost like a silent request for both of them to leave. Clara felt a small sigh of relief, but it wasn't time to celebrate. Yet, she knew that the police officer's repentance was not enough to reverse the harm they had caused, and she wanted them to know that. She, in a calm but firm voice, said, "There is no point in regretting now. You have crossed a line. This will not go unpunished." The older officer's gaze met Clara's for a brief moment, and the tension in the air was now palpable. He seemed to weigh the true responsibility for his actions. Genuine regret seemed to be forming, but it was too late. The damage was already done. The sound of the siren finally approached, and Clara felt an unexpected relief. The arrival of supervision not only brought a breath of hope, but also a shift in power that she had silently awaited throughout the entire situation. The patrol car stopped near the scene, and the tension in the air intensified. The older and younger police officer were now visibly uncomfortable, already realizing that the scenario was out of their control. From the car, an officer with an imposing posture got out, accompanied by another police officer. Both were clearly in supervisory positions, with more distinguished uniforms, perhaps more experienced, and carried a look that showed they understood the weight of the situation. They quickly observed the scene, their eyes making a thorough sweep of the situation until they finally settled on the two police officers who had initially approached Clara. The change was immediate. The oldest, previously so haughty, now became visibly small in the face of the arrival of the superior authority. He and his younger partner said nothing. The supervising officer approached Clara first, with a calm but firm gaze. He quickly realized the situation and turned to the two police officers. "Ma'am, I'm here to make sure you're safe. We will not tolerate any abuse of power. Please rest assured," the supervisor said calmly, but with the confidence of someone who knew he was dealing with a serious situation. The way he spoke gave a feeling of welcome and control. Clara felt the weight of fear and pressure on her begin to lessen, and a slight smile formed on her lips, although there was still anger built up over everything that had happened. The younger and older police officers looked at each other, speechless. They knew that the presence of supervision meant they were being closely watched. The supervisor's eyes flashed a reproachful look at the older officer, who, now that the situation was under supervision, seemed to have lost the confidence he once possessed. The supervisor waved his hand at the younger man. "Review their documentation," he said. The younger police officer hesitantly approached Clara and began checking her documents, but without the same aggressive and invasive tone as before. The presence of authority above them had completely transformed the police officer's behavior. The supervisor then turned to Clara and said clearly and respectfully, "We know you did nothing wrong. We are here to make it right. Your rights were not respected, and this will be handled as seriously as possible." The feeling of being heard and respected was like a wave of relief for Clara. The shift in power was real, and she could feel the tables had turned. Now, she was no longer the lone victim against authority, but a woman with the support she needed to challenge injustice. With the supervisor in charge, the situation began to clear up. Clara knew that the road would still be long, that what she had faced could not be undone, but at that moment she felt for the first time that the fight was in her favor. She was being protected, and supervision was there to ensure her rights were respected. As the supervisor approached Clara, reassuring her that the situation would be treated seriously, the weight of reality fell on the two officers. The presence of the supervising officer not only meant a correction of the situation at that time, but also the threat that their actions would be thoroughly investigated. Clara, although relieved, knew that what had happened could not be erased. That humiliation, the abuse of power, should not happen again to anyone. She felt a faint taste of justice approaching, but she knew that the consequences for the police officers were inevitable, and she didn't want this episode to pass without something being done. The supervisor, with a firm stance, turned to the two officers, now visibly uncomfortable. He began to question them about the approach procedure and the reasons for Clara's aggressive treatment. The older man, now clearly shaken, tried to formulate answers, but his words were failing him. He knew that the truth was against him, and that his intimidating stance would no longer be supported. "What justifies the treatment given to you?" the supervisor asked in a serious tone, his eyes fixed on the two police officers. There was no reason to approach her in this way. It was not a consented search. There was no complaint. What occurred here was a clear violation of this citizen's rights. The younger one, who was clearly more nervous, looked at his partner, waiting for some explanation. But the older officer was speechless. The superior authority and evidence against them were piling up, and the two knew that their actions would now be evaluated by an oversight team. The supervisor continued to question the officers, who were now unable to articulate a convincing defense. Meanwhile, Clara, although she still felt a slight trace of fear, could not contain the feeling that something important was being done. She didn't want revenge, but she wanted justice. I wanted those police officers to understand the gravity of what they did. The mere idea that someone with more authority was now intervening and questioning the security officers made his heart beat faster. The supervisor, after an exchange of words with the police officers, confirmed, "I will be taking all necessary steps to have this investigated and, if necessary, sanctioned. Abuse of authority will not be tolerated." Clara knew that the process would not be easy, but in that moment she felt that she was helping to open a door so that more people could be protected, and that abuse of power would not go unpunished. The legal consequences, which had seemed so far away before his call, were now within reach. She didn't know exactly what would come next, but the supervisor had given the clear indication that an investigation would be opened. The oldest and youngest would have to justify their actions, and any error would be corrected by a higher authority, far from the protection they previously believed they had. With the situation resolved at that moment, Clara felt a weight lift from her shoulders, but knew that her journey was not over yet. The immediate relief of seeing police officers being called to account was just a small victory. She knew the road ahead would be long, involving an investigation, perhaps even a lawsuit. But most importantly, she had taken the first step toward changing her own life and, potentially, the lives of others going through similar situations. As she watched the police officers walk away under supervision, Clara allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She thought about her life as a single mother, about the daily battles she faced to ensure that her son, Lucas, had a better future. There has always been a feeling of being invisible, of being ignored by authorities, by society. But that night, she had found her voice. She had been heard, and perhaps for the first time, she felt strong enough to fight the injustices that surrounded her. She remembered Lucas at home, perhaps waiting for her, and the image of him gave her strength to carry on. She knew deep down he needed her more than ever. And that moment, when she made the decision to make the call, to stand up for herself, was the kind of courage she wanted to teach him. It's not just about fighting against others, it's also about fighting for yourself. Clara felt like she was paving the way for a better future, not only for herself, but also for Lucas. When the supervisor said goodbye, he reinforced, "We are. With you, and everything that happened here will be treated seriously. You have the right to safety and respect, and no one else has the right to intimidate you like that." Clara thanked her in a soft tone, but the weight of the supervisor's words remained in her mind. She knew that the fight for justice would not be easy, but something inside her had changed. She was no longer the fragile woman who remained silent. In the face of injustice, she was someone with a voice, someone with the power to change things. As the patrol car drove away and the night returned to its calm, Clara took a moment to take it all in. Her fight was just beginning, but she no longer saw the difficulties as something insurmountable. She now knew that with courage and support, even the biggest obstacles could be overcome. The feeling of empowerment she felt after facing oppression from the police and emerging victorious would be something she would carry with her forever. Upon entering the house and seeing Lucas with that naive smile, Clara knew that her mission was clear. She wasn't just fighting for justice in that moment. She was fighting for dignity, freedom, and a better future for herself and for everyone who, like her, felt powerless in the face of life's adversities. If you liked this video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. Leave your comments saying whether justice was served for you.